All right, I'm gonna get started. So hi everyone, my name is Jimena. I am the outreach coordinator for the Long Island Sound Study National Estuary Program. And welcome, I'm super excited to be here today. This is our second webinar of the Community Science Long Island series. And this is our second time hosting the series. As you may know, this series is meant to highlight some of the community science opportunities around the island and make that connection between how being involved in these programs can make an actual difference in local environmental management and research and science. Today's webinar is focused on oysters, and we have an exciting lineup of panelists for you today. Before I hand it over to them, just a couple of details though. So number one, know that this webinar is being recorded. We can't see you unless I give you permission to turn on your camera, which you don't right now, so no worries there. But the recordings will be available in the Community Science webinar website at Seatuck, which I think I can put in the chat right now here. Oh no. Here. Copy and paste. There we go. So joining me today is Ariel Santos, who is the Policy Program Coordinator at Seatuck. We also have Sally Kellogg, who is the Program Implementation Specialist at the South Shore Estuary Reserve. And we have Valerie Vergona, who is the Peconic Estuary Partnerships Outreach Coordinator. All of these folks and more have been working together to make this webinar series possible. And along with them, we have our panelists. We have Maureen Dunn, who is a water quality scientist at the Seatuck Environmental Association, and she is the founder of the Half Shells for Habitat program, which you'll hear about shortly. We have Rob Crafa, who is the coordinator of the Oyster Bay Cold Spring Harbor Protection Committee and the waterfront director for SUNY Maritime College. And we have Kim Tetrault, who is the community aquaculture specialist for the Cornell Cooperative Extension Marine Program at Suffolk, and he is the founder of the SPAT program, which you will also hear about shortly. If you have any questions at any point throughout this series, feel free to drop them in the chat. You can also click on the Q&A button below and leave your questions there. And we'll have some time at the end of this webinar to discuss and answer any questions. So with that, Maureen, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Are we good?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Jimena. I really appreciate being invited to talk here today. Thank you to the Estuary Programs, Peconic Estuary Partnership, Long Island Sound Study, Sea Grant, and the South Shore Estuary Reserve. Thanks. So I'm Maureen Dunn. I'm water quality scientist at Seatuck, and Seatuck is a non-for-profit organization dedicated to conserving wildlife and the habitat that they depend on. I'd like to talk a little bit about the 15 minutes of about the natural history of oysters, and also how that ties into our oyster shell recovery program, Half Shells for Habitat. So I'm going to start off. There's a lot of information. I was looking for some new information for you, but I thought I'd begin with just navigating around an oyster. A lot of people really, you see half of an oyster in a restaurant, but you don't see the other half. So oysters are mollusks, and they're unique in that they're asymmetric. Unlike a clam or a mussel or a scallop, they have two different shells. They're not the same shape. So as you can see in this little image here, there's a left side of an oyster, which is the cup portion or the bottom, and that's the part that you would get in a restaurant. And then on the right-hand side is the top or the lid or the right-hand side of the oyster. That's the part you never see. But this is unique among bivalves. And oyster shells are made of calcium carbonate, mostly calcium carbonate, with a little protein. They can grow 8 to 10 inches long. They can grow longer, but this is kind of the average if left alone. And they can live 12 to 15 years. Another interesting fact about oysters is they are hermaphrodites. So they start out as males, and as they grow a little larger, they invest more energy into being females. And so they can be both males and females at different times. They'll change from one to another. So those are kind of some interesting facts about oysters. This is part of the natural history. And here's a little bit about the anatomy of an oyster. So this is Chrysostra virginica, and I believe everyone today is going to talk about the same species of oyster. These are also called the Wellfleet oyster, the Eastern oyster, but just a little anatomy. Excuse my voice. I'm recovering from laryngitis, so I'm doing the best I can. It sounds a little weird, but so this is oyster anatomy, and there's three things I'd like to point out. One is those the red arrows on the right-hand side. A points to the adductor muscle, and that is the muscle that people cut when they open an oyster. And there's like 22 pounds of pressure holding those two shells together. And so it's really an incredible force that holds those two shells together. And also the large kind of striated organ, the next arrow is G, which are the gills. So oysters are filter feeders. They suck the water in, they open their two shells, they suck the water in, and they filter out algae and particles in the water. And the last thing that I thought is really important, just to understand oysters and how they grow, is the mantle. And the mantle is almost, it excretes the shell. And so like our fingers excrete a fingernail, this is how the shell is formed. So I thought those were kind of interesting aspects of anatomy. And I would like to point out that I never show this slide when I talk at like restaurants and things, because no one wants to know they also have a stomach and a liver and everything else. But I can do this today, so I'm glad to finally be able to present this this slide. So also I was so Chrysostra virginica has been around for about 10,000 years, but oysters themselves have been around for over 420 million years, 520 million years. Which is, really pretty amazing. Oysters as we know it, and these fossils that I have here, I was fortunate to be gifted some oyster fossils. These fossils are true oysters, and the one on the right is called Devil's Toenail. And what you're seeing is the cup side of the oyster. This is only one shell, and that little flat part on the right is where the top lid would be. So these are primitive and 175 million years ago. So that's pretty amazing. And then the one on the left, a little more modern, it looks a little more like our oysters, but still an early oyster from the Cretaceous. So 65 million years ago, that's when the glaciers were starting to melt. And that was really the heyday of oysters, because as the glaciers melted, they created these shallow areas along the coast, and oysters do very well in these shallow areas. So also both of these oysters were free living in that they lived in the sediments, usually sandy bottoms, almost like clams do today, where modern oysters, like Chrysostra virginica, will actually form mostly on reefs. So we know that in the 1800s, New York City and Long Island were the oyster capitals of the world. There's a great book by Mark Kurlansky on the big oyster that I recommend. But oysters have been around for a long time. The Romans were actually cultivating them and also consuming them. That's where the idea that they first that they had some aphrodisiac properties came about from the Romans, and there is some evidence that they have a high amount of zinc, and that may actually increase their aphrodisiac ability. But we also know that about 6,000 years ago, the Native Americans were consuming oysters. We know this from finding kitchen middens, which is where they would throw their shells, almost like a trash location where they would throw their shells after consuming them year after year. And so, oysters have been around a long time and plentiful. And I think that's what I really wanted to get to, is that they're really plentiful. You can see on this left photo, these are all oyster shells. So they were taken from reefs, oyster reefs that were in the Blue Points area, and Blue Points were considered some of the finest oysters in the world. And then on the right is a cart from New York City. Oysters would be 6 cents for all you can eat oysters. Another fact that I found that was kind of interesting was Abraham Lincoln, when he was a young politician, would host oyster parties as part of his campaign. So oysters were plentiful, abundant, eaten by both the wealthy and the poor. And then we started to lose oyster reefs. So there's evidence from Native Americans from those shell middens that that overharvesting was starting. And we know that because the shells were getting smaller. So they were harvesting them earlier. And so that's an indication of overharvesting. Also, the colonial settlers overharvested. On top of that, oyster drills came into, this is the Long Island area. Oyster drills came into the western bays on the South Shore, both from inlets and openings, but the saltier water attracts more oyster drills, which are still around today. In the 1890s, sort of at the heyday, which is what I was just talking about, there were 27 million bushels of oysters harvested yearly on the East Coast. And, you know, that's a considerable amount. There weren't that many people at the time. In 1938 and around that time as well, hurricanes in the area started depositing silt over the Long Island oyster reefs. And these were massive, hard structures, these hard reefs that would form. And the silt kind of clogs up their gills, and so they don't do as well. And in time, the depletion of oysters just continued. There are also oyster-to-oyster diseases. They don't affect people, but they do affect oysters, MSX and dermo. Those diseases are still around. There are ways to try to get around them. There are disease-resistant oysters, but those diseases are still around. By the end of the 1900s, oyster reefs had declined by 99% on Long Island. Really quickly, I wanted to put this in as how do oyster reefs form? And I think, you know, unlike clams and scallops, oysters form these reefs. And it's really critical to understand that they do form reefs, and that's unique. So on the left, you can see there are 2 adult oysters, and they're part of a living reef, and they are broadcast spawners, so they put out sperm and eggs. If there's enough of them around, those sperm and eggs find each other, and they make these small villages, these small larvae. They're free swimming larvae. They swim around, and eventually they come to a point where they have to attach to a hard substrate. You know, because oysters don't move around, they count on the water near them moving. That's why they like intertidal areas. So if they attach to a piece of wood or a sandy bottom, they don't do very well. And some of the reason for that is because it takes a lot of energy to create a shell. These little tiny attached oysters are called spat, and I think Rob's going to talk about them later. But if the spat attached to an oyster shell, the material to make shells is calcium carbonate. It's dissolving from the other shells, and so the water is really rich in calcium carbonate. So young oysters or spat really do very well when they have other shells to land on. Oyster reefs. So this is all wild oysters, wild oyster reefs, which most of us have never seen. So what are the benefits of oysters and oyster reefs? I'm going to touch on this a little bit, but when they're consumed, they do improve water clarity and water quality. So that allows things like eelgrass to grow. They provide habitat for other organisms. They also reduce wave action, so they protect the coast as well. And my favorite is they mitigate coastal acidification, which is a growing problem in our bays and waterways. At this point, I've had someone give me feedback and say, "Wait a minute, you're talking about oysters, and they're like nearly extinct, and we don't have any. The whole bay is full of oysters. The Sound is full of oysters. The Peconic's full of oysters." But I wanted to make this distinction that there are farmed oysters, and that's aquaculture, and there are wild oyster reefs. And they're very different. They're different in the way they grow. They're different in the benefits that they, some benefits are the same, but they're different in the benefits that they get. So on the right is a shell with spat on shell. And I'm not going to go into that right now. I think Rob will. And that eventually forms an oyster reef, a wild oyster reef, like I was just talking about. But on the left here, you see that there are tiny individual oysters. Those are the kinds you eat. It's an individual oyster. The ones that you're served in a restaurant are not in a big mound. They're individuals. They're grown in cages, and they're actually tricked to think they're on a piece of a reef, but they're not. So I did want to talk about shell recycling and how this plays into conserving wild oysters. So farmed oysters are served in restaurants. And what Half Shells for Habitat does, it's an oyster shell recovery program, Long Island wide. But what we do is, there are other oyster shell recovery programs all over the country, but what happens is you take the shells from the restaurant. These are waste shells that would otherwise be thrown out. And we have volunteers that pick them up. This is Kathleen Gorman, one of our volunteers on the right here. And the waste shells are collected from restaurants. So the cultivated oysters can actually benefit the wild oyster restoration. So this is a little slide on Half Shells for Habitat, Oyster Shell Recovery Program. And so this is a partnership actually between the restaurants, the towns that store the shells, and the restoration programs. And Seatuck manages this program, and we keep track of shells and volunteers, and this is, yeah, I don't know what else I want to say about that. I'm trying to go fast. So this is sort of the ultimate goal of these shells that are recovered from restaurants, and that is to go back and create that living reef that was missing, those shells that those larvae cannot land on. And so we donate these shells to different projects. These are some of the projects we've worked with: Moriches Bay Project with Cornell, Shinnecock Bay, Corps, and a number of other programs. And so Seatuck manages that program. And so I like to talk about why we recycle oyster shells, which gets back to their habitat. And one is to enhance water quality for habitat restoration, reducing nitrogen, reduce landfill, stabilize shorelines. They provide habitat for other creatures. As you're going to see in the next talks too, these projects are great for community involvement and for tourism. I couldn't show this without showing oyster filtering experiment. And one thing I would like to say is we talk about oysters filter 50 gallons of water per day, but you have to keep in mind that a human can consume 42 hot dogs in 10 minutes, but that doesn't mean that they can eat 6,048 hot dogs a day. So, so some of those numbers really have to be put in perspective, but they are amazing. These are two tanks that both were full of algae, and the right one had oysters in it. So This is a little experiment we did live, and the results are pretty dramatic. So for volunteer opportunities, Ariel Santos coordinates our volunteers, and she's our conservation scientist as well. And if you're interested in working with Half Shells for Habitat or volunteering with Half Shells for Habitat, please, let us know. And thank you.
Wonderful. That was great, Maureen. Thank you so much. And I will share all of these emails and everything at the end when we send out the email to attendees. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rob Crafa. Like I said, he is the coordinator of the Oyster Bay Cold Spring Harbor Protection Committee, and he's going to talk about the Oyster Gardening program that they've got going on. So over to you, Rob.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. And Maureen, thank you for saving me some slides. We're talking about spout on shell. As Jimena mentioned, my name is Rob Crafa. I'm the coordinator for the Oyster Bay Cold Spring Harbor Protection Committee. That's the program I'll principally be talking about today. It's a part-time job where I'm fortunate to work with 11 municipalities in the Oyster Bay Cold Spring Harbor watershed. I also have another job at SUNY Maritime College where I'm the waterfront director, and I'm pleased to be able to do oyster research and all sorts of other programs there. And I'm pleased to work with the Billion Oyster Project in the Bronx as well. So I'm certainly not an official representative for them, but I'm proud to support their efforts in New York Harbor. A little bit about the protection committee. As I said, all the local governments around Oyster Bay and Cold Spring Harbor protect, work on stormwater protection, education and awareness about updating and maintaining your septic tank, dog waste campaigns, and all sorts of fun stuff like that. But the one program that we've done since 2017 that really has been incredible is Oyster Gardening. And I don't have to go too much into this because Maureen discussed it, but the typical reasons are here for why people typically do oyster restoration efforts. Interestingly, for us, is really about education and awareness. We wanted to get people's feet wet and hands muddy intentionally several times a month to get them to really appreciate their resources. Because as this slide shows, in Cold Spring Harbor, there is a really bad trend where from the southern part of Cold Spring Harbor by 25A, where some people may know where the Cold Spring Harbor laboratory is and the fish hatcheries is, going north, there's an unfortunate progression of the water quality continuing to decline. And Cold Spring Harbor, which is a beautiful, beautiful embayment, I sort of call the stepchild, which is sandwiched between the town of Huntington and the town of Oyster Bay, and Nassau and Suffolk County, and sometimes gets lost a little bit. So we want to raise awareness about the water quality here and get people involved. So really, the effort wasn't so much about oyster restoration as it was about just getting people involved and finding a good tool to do that. Interestingly, I always say, if we could have baked brownies or baked cookies, we would have done that and we'd actually be able to eat them. The oysters, we have to give back. So, but it really is an incredible program. How can you argue with a bunch of Girl Scouts in a t-shirt that says oysters are fantastic? And that's really, really what we found is people really, really enjoy participating in the Oyster Gardening program. In 3 decades of doing environmental conservation, cleaning up more cigarette butts and planting more eelgrass, and I can say this program truly, really is the most enthusiastically received by the community that I've ever been a part of. So for us, what is oyster gardening? It's real simple. It's just helping juvenile oysters reach maturity through tender love and care. And what I just wanted to show here is sort of all the steps. So we start off with about 1,000 oysters that are, for us, about 10 to 12 millimeters in size. They fit into a bag like that, sort of like a big softball size. These 2 young ladies here have the baby oysters. We put them in these floating cages, and and a string between 2 moorings over the course of a couple months. They grow, and a couple times a month, volunteers come down. We clean the cages. You can see the phenomenal growth we have here in Cold Spring Harbor and Oyster Bay. And you can see the phenomenal growth of oysters that we have here with Evie, one of our volunteers. So they measure 20 oysters each time, and then they put them back, noting any mortality or any unusual things. And then the best day of the year is when we get to seed the oysters into a spawner sanctuary that we have. I'd be remiss in saying, and at the risk of embarrassing Kim, but I hope I do, is I've been watching the SPAT program since 2000, and living in Western Suffolk, I could never justify the long drive out to do SPAT. But I really feel like now that Kim's on this panel, I feel like I'm opening up for Led Zeppelin here. This is fantastic. So the SPAT program really is sort of the granddaddy of all the programs in this area. But there's all programs, as you can see, around the country that do something similar. So we really owe a lot to these groups because we've stolen liberally from them, for sure. And then even locally, we do have a lot. We work a lot with Cornell Cooperative Extension. They provide the oysters for us. They provide the technical assistance. Most of our oysters are received from the hatchery right next to the SPAT hatchery, or maybe it's the same hatchery now in Southold. Friends of the Bay, our local environmental conservation organization, is tremendously helpful. All the partners, the member municipalities of the protection committee are great, particularly Laurel Hollow and Bayville. And the Waterfront Center serves as an outreach and educational arm. So they'll do their summer camp programs and other outreach and scout programs with the group. Just Saturday, they had a kayak tour go by while we were cleaning the oysters, and we gave them a little talk there. And this is probably one of the rare places you'll actually see a Baymen's Association and Oyster Company on the same slide, because they actually work together and help us as well. Yeah, for my normal presentations, we talk about the difference between the single set oysters and the spat on shell. We use both products now. As Maureen said, they're the same oyster, they're just cultivated slightly differently. Kim and Maureen are probably way more qualified to tell you about than I am. I just like to remind volunteers that although they look different, they're very, very much the same. And so I call the single set oysters the sexy oysters because they get big and nice and plump, and they look very delicious and edible, whereas the spat on shell are sort of like the ugly little brother. But we grow those in areas they're close to shell fishing, so they're less of a attractive nuisance for poachers. And I think, as we try to convince the volunteers that growing the ugly little sibling is okay because it provides more habitat and can maybe help us more quickly establish those reefs that Maureen pointed out have been so decimated. The way we do oyster gardening here, and every program is slightly different, but you can see very easily where we've stolen from others. But as I mentioned, we get our oyster gardeners, of which we have about 150 people. We're raising about, I think, 194,000 oysters, single set oysters this year. We get them about 4 months old from the Southold hatchery at about 12 millimeters. We put them in these floating cages with a 6 millimeter mesh, and those cages are clipped between 2 moorings at a local beach. And here's where our locations are. We have West Harbor Beach in Bayville, where we're growing single set oysters. Beekman Beach in Oyster Bay actually has spat on shell because of the closure line right here in Oyster Bay. West Neck Beach, we're actually not using this year because of insurance issues. That's what happens when you get lawyers involved with oysters. The Laurel Hollow Village Dock was our initial location and our busiest location. We have single set oysters there. And because that closure line I showed you is like right there, Eagle Dock, which is a couple hundred feet, probably maybe a couple hundred yards south of the closure line, we have spat on shell there. So it's spat on shell in these 2 locations, Beekman and Eagle Dock, and Bayville and Oyster Bay have single set oysters. Each location has a moorings and anywhere from 25 to 50 gardeners per location cleaning up the oysters. In addition, there's a couple of yacht clubs, bath clubs, there's a public beach, and some private residents who also do oyster gardening at their locations. Our schedule, so right now we're right in the middle of everything. May and June, we sort of promote the program, get the gardens ready, put the moorings out, build the cages. And then we get the oysters at the end of June. And from that time until as long as we can hold the volunteers together, usually middle of September, we clean and measure the oysters every other week, coincidentally with the low tide. Interestingly, one of the things we found is they're in public locations, so people can go tend to their oysters anytime they want. We encourage them to name them, go sing to them, do whatever they like. But what we found is that they actually like to do it. And one of the big benefits of the program is they actually like to do it together. And that's one of the things. So we host bi-weekly cleanings where we clean the oysters, measure the oysters, and then pretty soon the oysters are getting so big, we're gonna have to split them to a second cage. And then the fun part comes in September, October, where we seed the oysters to a spawner sanctuary right in Cold Spring Harbor. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. And then we have another stolen idea. We have a celebration at the end where we have a potluck meal and we share great recipes. And we also buy oysters as much as we can from local sources and clams from local sources to support the local guys. And then we give them to our gardeners so that to sort of make up for the oysters that they raise for us and we put on our spawner sanctuary, they can bring some oysters home. Who are the people that are crazy enough to pay us money to raise oysters that they're never going to get to eat? Well, it's just about everybody. And I think that the coolest thing is when you see a family of 3 generations. The grandfather brings down his daughter or his son and their grandkids to help do this. It's friends and neighbors. I've had people tell me that they've met more people in their neighborhood in 1 month of oyster gardening than in 20 years of living in the community. But we have Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Sea Scouts, church groups, garden clubs, yacht clubs. And yes, we even got some politicians, not just there for the photo op, but in there actually cleaning their cages. So it's very, very diverse group and very, very fun group for sure. And as I mentioned from the top, our goal really was engagement, education, and outreach. And we've certainly done that. We have dozens, if not hundreds of people every year gardening with us who are getting out there. In our end of the year annual survey, if you ask them, are they more connected to Long Island Sound? Are they more aware of the water quality issues? And are they more willing to preserve and protect those areas? It's a resounding yes. So in and of that itself, it's been a huge success over the 5 years we've done the program. But some other things that have happened is, we established that we encourage the town of Oyster Bay to establish the first spawner sanctuary in the town of Oyster Bay, because we didn't want to just put our oysters out there to seed public lands. We wanted these oysters to be fruitful and multiply on their own protected area so that we could in part seed those public waters, but we really want to try to get a critical mass so that we can create a sustainable oyster population and maybe create some of those 3D reefs that Maureen talked about. In addition, there's a picture on the bottom right there of Dr. Aaron Freeman from Adelphi University. He's done recruitment studies. He's holding up, I think, a GoPro there. He's got time-lapse photography. When we were setting up the spawner sanctuary, he sort of did a before, and he's in the middle of doing during of what other animals might be on the bay bottom. The bottom was previewed to be very hard, but devout and good for oysters, but very devout of any natural set of oysters. So we wanted to see if there are any other organisms using the bay bottom before we put the oysters there. And there weren't much, but what's happened now is now that we're monitoring the oyster reef, we're seeing a lot more use by finfish, crabs, and other organisms. So it's really, really exciting to see when we talk about water quality improvements, which are hard to see, the habitat improvements and the use by other aquatic species is really, really incredible. And I should mention too, with the spawner sanctuary, the big thing is once the spawner sanctuary is established, we've probably put about 300,000 oysters there. And when we put them down at the end of a season, they're probably about 2 inches in size. That sanctuary has grown, and we're able to have the town put another couple 100,000 oysters there. And then we're fortunate to be part of the SOAR program with Pew Charitable Trust and the Nature Conservancy, where they took the big and uglies from the growers who they couldn't sell them to the restaurants during the pandemic. And we were able to put another I think it was 40 to 60,000 oysters, 3 to 5 inches in size on this sanctuary. And right now we've got a Long Island Sound Futures Fund grant to study the effectiveness of our current sanctuary and look at other areas throughout the Oyster Bay Cold Spring Harbor area that might also be good spawner sanctuaries. And we'd really love to get at least one in the Oyster Bay area as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I think we're okay on time. Our goal, as I said, is to get people involved. So I hope there's some folks on this call here, or this meeting, would love to get us involved. We can start you cleaning oysters anytime you want. And there's plenty of work to do. But if you have any questions or comments afterwards, feel free to reach out to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. That was fantastic. And, again, I will share Rob's email and phone number in case anybody's interested in reaching out and learning more about the program. So Rob, could you stop sharing your screen so that I can hand it over to Kim, please? And so last but certainly not least, we have Kim Tetrault. He is the community aquaculture specialist with CCE. And like Rob mentioned, his SPAT program was one of the first programs of this kind to come up on Long Island. So Kim, over to you.
Well, actually, since Rob gave me that awesome shout out, I thought I'd just play the bass line for Ramble On because they've already said everything about oysters, so I don't need to say a thing, which is good because my PowerPoint doesn't have anything in it about oysters, I don't think. And Rob talked about community, so I could just jam for the next, but maybe I won't. I'll let me cue this up here. That's not it. Where is it? Is this it? No, that's not it. I'm sorry. Where did hold on. What have I done here? Stop share. Let me just call this up. My screen went out on me, so here it is. Okay, and now I go back to here.
Well, you find it, I will say there is a request for you to play it. So maybe during the Q&A, if nothing this time,
okay,
you can get an extra concert in here.
I think I got it now. Here it is. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, so thanks for having me. Thanks for coming out, everybody. The SPAT program has been a real hoot for me for 22 years. I've been at Cornell Cooperative Marine for 27 years, started the SPAT program in 2000. So we're in our 22nd year, and I'm just gonna run through a bunch of little milestones and things like that. So we built a hatchery 20 years ago. So we have a community run only. It was built, funded, and is run by community volunteers only. That our mandate is education and training. We create our own seed, clams, oysters, and scallop seed over the 20 years out of the SPAT check over at the Southhold Marine Program. So we have a hatchery. This is actually Valentine's Day. We're doing the first spawn of the year. I got my executive director there and my boss there, and we're doing a Valentine's Day. What better time to spawn oysters than on Valentine's Day? So these were oysters that were conditioned by our volunteers. We spawned them in the hatchery. And just as a note for folks that are gardening and putting oysters out, we used last year's oysters, the largest of last year's oysters. So they were 1 calendar year old. We used 22 oysters, 11 were female, and that generated 2.5 million seed. So your oysters that you're growing, when you go to plant them, they spawn in the spring and have the capability of spawning in the spring. SPAT has their own algae room, completely built and operated by volunteers. We have a land-based upweller room, which we built. But the volunteers and myself, we build and operate everything ourselves. We don't hire anybody to do anything for us. So all the silos, all the tanks, all the buildings, all the electric, all the plumbing, everything we do in-house with our volunteers. We have the land-based upweller right now has 2.5 million clams in the system up top. We have floating upwellers right at the moment. We're running 5 floating upwellers. We've got 54 barrels of oyster seed we grew 4 million oyster seed this year. And so we had a really great year, by the way. That's phenomenal for us. This is an old picture of the flupsies. We build a lot of flupsies. This is yesterday in the rain. You know, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, year round at the Marine Center is an open door policy for people to come in. We operate year round. So my office hours are 8 to noon, even though I get in at like 5:30 in the morning now because I live right down the road. So people can come in. Everybody. The unique thing about the SPAT program is that it's a membership program. We have 350 family members right now. Every family gets 1,000 oysters, and they get to keep their oysters. I don't want any back. Every one of them is a spawner sanctuary. So everyone gets 1,000 oysters. They tend them on at various facilities. We have the Southold facility, which has about 140 people. We have the Tiana Bayside facility that has 100 people. We have Sag Harbor Oyster Club is 17, Oak Island is 18, and the rest of the people are growing at their own docks with a special collector permit. We have a culling machine. We have all 4 pressure washers hooked up. We got all the equipment. We use cement mixers for oyster washing machines. It's just to have everyone have a lot of fun. We've been doing spat on shell now. We did 2 runs of spat on shell that were tremendous. So we were doing just field plantings of spat on shell. And the reason for spat on shell is it's just built-in habitat. You can put them on the bottom. They're not going to sink as readily into the mud. They don't have the same poaching pressure. People look at them funny. And they look great. And it's a lot of fun to have students and interns and everybody just go along and seed out the creek beds, the banks with spat on shell. So these are just for, at more. We did 3 oyster spawns this year. So the first 2 were for single on microculture oyster, and the third spawn was spat on shell, and then we were given some larvae, and we did a second spat on shell. So we had a good run with spat on shell this year. It's kind of a lot of fun. Seed oysters, we cull them constantly. Everybody gets the largest seed. People come in, literally, some people sign up in November to do the program. Some people come in early in the spring to get their seed. I have this spot at Tiana that I had a member today that is a brand new member. She got her oysters. They went away for a month to Europe. They came back and tended their oysters. And they were so big, this year's seed, that they ate a bunch of them, which I was shocked. They were so big. There were already 2.5-inch oysters, and they just got them. It's like phenomenal. It's all about the water. And I'm finding out that it's not necessarily about tending, because these people went to Europe for a month and they came back and they had literally the best oysters on the block. I learn something every day. What can I say? It's all a mystery. We have our own wood shop. We build everything. They keep their shop. We did all the electric. We did all the walls. We didn't build the building. We had Morton come and put the building up, but we buy our own tools. They keep a very nice shop. We fix everything that we run, all the machinery, all the outboard motors. It's what keeps volunteers coming in every Monday, Wednesday. I have a group of about 15 people that come every single Monday, Wednesday, Friday, year round, all the way through the winter, all year round. Why? Because we never slow down. Our busiest time is January, February, March, because of the hatchery. And so, building the equipment, maintaining the equipment. I used to do a lot of live. We've been doing Zoom, but I've done 22 years of lectures. Even during COVID, we went Zoom. But I'm going to start doing the live lectures. They're very popular. I give 22 two-hour lectures a year. So it's pretty intensive training, but that's part of the fun. I treat them all like grad students, but they all fail the final exam every year. It's awesome. And people come out and there's a lot of, as Rob would know, there's incredible camaraderie with volunteers. They become a family, and they are a family. They're an amazing asset to any program. But for folks like Rob and I who are in the trenches with them, there's nothing more rewarding than this group that comes out that are so dedicated. I mean, I don't have any paid staff. For 22 years, I haven't had any paid staff because nobody works as hard as my volunteers. And it's just too frustrating to have to yell at somebody that's getting paid. So I don't ever yell at my volunteers. And they come out and the blue hats are the ones that come every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, year round. And almost none of them are growing oysters anymore. They don't have any time. So I see a couple here that are tending oysters, but there's a blue hat, a blue hat, a blue hat. So, oh, that's one of my new SPAT members. Speaking of Led Zeppelin, that's Grandpa Dusty. He came in looking like ZZ Top. He's playing a pressure washer there. But his first year, he grew the most incredible oysters. He had like 100% survival. So he's loving the program. There's a father and son that came in yesterday. First time the son came in to help dad. He's standing in back of the oyster washing machine, as I call it. And, we have all this facility. We have a big campus for everybody. And the reason why they're so comfortable is there's a huge amount of ownership in the program. Everybody puts in, so everybody deserves to take out. And we built this barge for the scallop. This is my volunteers built this barge at a marina. It came on a flatbed truck and we put it together. So there's some pretty serious talent you can get out of volunteers. We built 4 of these boats. We raffled a couple. We have 2 for our own. That's a Bolger 18-foot work skiff. We built 4 of these sailing nutshell prams, so we would raffle them and fundraiser. I sold this boat 3 times. You sell a boat and they give you all kinds of money and they say, well, we don't really want the boat. And so we keep the money and sell the boat again. This is a great boat. I still have that boat, actually. We built 4 of these Gloucester rowing dories. But then we decided, instead of building these full-size boats that nobody's ever going to use, we started building quarter scale and half scale for shucking tables. And these things are incredibly popular. Now, why do I build boats? If you can train a volunteer to build a boat, he can definitely build a floating upweller. He can definitely build a shed. He can, or she can build, anything you need. So boat building is a good training for skills that you need for this operation. We've built 50 flopsies. Actually, we were part of the governor's project. The governor's project built 70 floating upwellers, which we built a lot of the barrels and the things, but they're quite nice. SPAT built one of the very few solar-driven floating upwellers. So this was for Moriches Bay project. They commissioned us to build this. And these guys, without ever having done anything solar, put this entire thing together, ran like a champ until somebody in the town of Moriches stole all the batteries, which is about $4,000 worth of batteries. So it's hard to replace. So yeah, that hurts, Rob, right? Yeah, that's what Laura said. So my volunteers right now, one of the projects they're working on is these floating upwellers have ice eater motors in them that are notoriously finicky. They break down, they're very expensive. So we've kind of pioneered these out of the water, off the shelf Granger and McMaster Carr motors. Here's Dave, I'll go back. Here's Dave standing in front of, he's got 2 of these on the workbench today, and the one's going in the water tomorrow. We have the prototype has been running for 5 years. And it's a remarkable thing. And we'd love to share, this design and this concept with people, because these things are just monstrous. This will grow you oysters out of control. We have the Tiana So the town of Southampton one day at a meeting said, oh, we've got a place that you can grow oysters. And we went down there and it was like a, I don't know, 800-foot dock. And they gave us this facility. So it's now open to 100 oyster gardeners. They also gave us the building for this education center that the education group at Cornell runs. This is an old picture. Now we've got the black industrial floats on everything. We got rid of all swim noodles, but it looked really festive back then. It kind of looked nice. I'm getting off in a second. I'm almost done. So this looked like a big party on the water, but it's very orderly and people are growing phenomenal oysters. And again, I was there today and there were about 28 people there today tending their oysters. We do have celebration every year. We had our 10th annual last year. It sells out every year. That's fun. We have our spat picnic, which apparently Rob stole the idea, and it's a great thing to do for your group, is to have a picnic, throw a band on it. That's Gil Goldstein there, and here's the raffle boats and all these things, and people going out and we do 2,000 piece raw bar at the thing. And why? Because this is what it's all about. If you're not having fun doing your program, then you're probably not having any fun, and no one else is either. So, you can't leave the enthusiasm and the fun part out of the project because it just gets dry. So I've been very, very, very lucky. All I can say is, anyone that wants to get into the program, this isn't a black box secret information. We're all we're all on the same page. We're all in the same boat. We're all working for the same goals. So, let's network, and that's what it's all about. Bingo.
Thank you so much, Kim. That was fantastic. All right, so folks, we have about 8 minutes for questions. Like I said, you can drop them in the chat. You can put them in the Q&A. Oh, Maureen is saying Happy National Oyster Day. It's this week, the August 5th. But if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. You can also raise your hand and I can unmute you if you would prefer that. I guess in the meantime, a question I would have for all of you, since you're all involved to some, with volunteer programs essentially, is, and you touched on this already, but how do you sell the program to people who haven't been involved before? Like, how do you get them interested in joining?
I can start. I'll just say that SPAT has always been word of mouth. We've never advertised, but if you can get anybody at your facility and show them anything you're doing, they'll be hooked. I'm lucky because I have microscopes that you can show somebody a one-day-old oyster larvae eating incessant little microalgae. And once people get a taste of it, they want in. And so if it's, putting their hands on oysters out on the field, especially with kids, they're going to want in. And then the other thing I would say is, once you get anybody in, you must keep a momentum and a purpose. Don't leave people hanging too long with nothing to do, because they'll move on to something else that they want to do. So if you find a core group of people that are really gung-ho, put them right to work and work them hard, because they want to be worked hard.
I'd like to add to that too, Kim. So at Half Shells, can you hear me? Yeah, at Half Shells for Habitat, we have, a number of volunteers, the most dedicated volunteers ever. And they're really kind of unsung heroes in that they're the shells themselves are the foundation of a lot of these spat on shell programs as well. And, they're out there every day. We've had volunteers from the very beginning, and they go out once a week and collect shells from restaurants, but they form a relationship with the restaurant. And then we hope to get them also involved in the actual restoration process. But I agree with you. Once you get volunteers, keep them very busy. And it's amazing how much we rely on volunteers. The entire Half Shell program runs on volunteers. So yeah. They're unsung heroes sometimes.
That's really, I feel like that's such a great component of these programs. We have a question for you, Maureen. How can we donate our shells to Half Shell for Habitat? Do you take donations or do you only take them from restaurants?
Muted.
Oops, I was muted. Sorry. Yeah, we can take shells. We do take them from growers as well. I would say just contact myself. My emails was up there. Ariel Santos as well works with our volunteers. But just contact us at my email or at Seatuck or Half Shells for Habitat. We have a Facebook page and Instagram account. Just get in touch with us and we'll work with picking the shells up. Depends on how many there are. If you contact us, you can drop shells off. If you just have a small bucket, you can drop them off, but you have to contact us first so we know every shell is logged in, and that's to avoid disease, oyster to oyster disease. So we can track every single bucket through the entire process, all the way till they have to age and be cured. And so it's important that we log in every single bucket of shells. But yeah, we do accept shells, and just let us know when you either drop them off or need them picked up. But that's a great question. I hope to see them.
Awesome, thank you. And like I said, I'll share Maureen and Ariel's emails and contact info so you can get in touch with them. All right, so any final questions? We have time for one or two more. We have a comment. Great program. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. I guess I have another question for you all. I mean, I feel like I've seen some articles about oyster populations not booming necessarily, but doing better in recent years in New York. Do you have information on that? Can you comment on that at all?
My only comment would be that there are a lot more oyster growers. I mean, in New York, almost all of the oysters are farmed. There's very little wild set that's being harvested. Connecticut has a lot more. Other places have a lot more. New York is virtually all cultured oyster. But again, all of these oysters spawn. They spawn before they're sold. Whether the grower wants them to or not, unless they're triploids, they're going to spawn. So, you know, everybody that's helping culture oysters, including the growers, are providing more brood stock for the environment. And something that none of us mentioned maybe was the fact that because of oyster life cycle being in the water column, oysters are incredible at fecundity. A female oyster casts off millions and millions and millions of eggs. Now, obviously, in nature, you're not going to get them all to fertilize and all these things, but the more brood stock you have, the better chance you have of recruitment into the environment. So with more oyster growers, there's more standing brood stock. There should be more set. It's a matter of the location. Salinity seems to play a role in recruitment in a lot of places. Habitat certainly going to have a role. But all of these things, we're working towards putting back and not always just taking. And so that could be one reason why you're seeing, you know, rebound. But you certainly are also seeing, you know, there aren't enough hatcheries, but people growing oysters relieves any harvest pressure too. That's what spat on shell is a different thing, because the more people that are doing spat on shell, that's all inherent supposed standing brood population. That's what it's for, reef building. So that's not for harvest. That's for a breeder reactor. And so the more that happens, Billion Oyster Project with Pete Malinowski, you know, these are huge projects that could mean a lot. And so we're all a part of that.
just on that, I think to Kim's point, one of the things that excites me, and one of the things I wanted to ask Kim was about, he's been doing this so long, what he's seen as the long-term trends. But what I think is really exciting, having gotten into this more recently, is whether it's the small growers out east that are doing it commercially, or the small programs like us that are popping up. One of the things I'm most proud about is the folks next door in Hempstead Harbor just started their program there for community oyster gardening this year. And then one of Kim's cohorts, Barry Udelson at Cornell on the western side of Suffolk County in Huntington, is also working with some yacht clubs and whatnot in Huntington. So almost every harbor now around Long Island has a gardening program, a town shellfish program. And so where I'm worried about where my spawn are going and from my oyster or Cold Spring Harbor Sanctuary, they may be winding up somewhere far away from where I am, and I may be getting somebody else's oysters. But I think we're getting that critical mass going where it's going to be really exciting if we can keep this enthusiasm up for another few years to see where we're going. And I know Tom, who I just met here, is talking about Alley Pond and Little Neck Bay. For those of you in the New York City area, I would certainly recommend Pete Malinowski and the Billion Oyster Project. They have sort of a blanket permit, and they use it as an outreach program. So we have 9 oyster restoration stations at SUNY Maritime College in the Bronx, and they'll put other oyster restoration stations wherever they want. And so we have residents or we have school groups coming and using the oyster restoration stations as an educational tool to learn and to measure. So if you're looking to do it in the New York City or the 5 boroughs, the Billion Oyster Project is certainly a nice resource.
Thanks so much. And that kind of, you saw that gets at Tom's questions. He was asking if you have any thoughts on how to expand resources in Queens. So, all right, it's 7:02, so I'm going to wrap this up to be mindful of everybody's time. Thank you so much for everyone for coming. Thank you so much for to our panelists. This was fantastic. We missed the Ramble On concert. It'll have to be next time.
Next time. No, actually, I play at the Ram's Head on Shelter Island now every Tuesday. So come on by and hear Shuck and Jive. And you can hear
There
it.
you go. There you go. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have
Yeah.
a great night.
Happy Oyster Day.
Bye.